Hey guys, tonight we begin with the story of Greek mythology. You don't need to keep your eyes open. You don't need to hold on to every detail. Let the words come and go like the sound of waves on a distant shore. Greek myths are filled with thunder and fire, love and jealousy, kings and wanderers. But here, in the quiet of night, they soften. The monsters become shadows, the storms become whispers, and the heroes walk gently, as if not to wake you. Close your eyes if they're not closed already. Take a slow breath in and let it drift out. Another one, in and out. Good. The Greeks told stories to explain the world around them. They looked at the sky and wondered who lived beyond the clouds. They watched the sea and asked who stirred its restless waves. They saw the crops sprout in spring and wither in winter, and they imagined a goddess grieving, then smiling again when her daughter returned. These stories weren't just entertainment. They were explanations, lessons, warnings, and comforts. And they've lasted for thousands of years because people found meaning in them, even when they changed with every telling. We're about to wander through all of it, starting from the very beginning, when there wasn't even earth or sky, only an endless space called chaos. From there, we'll meet the first beings, the giants called Titans, and then the younger gods who became the Olympians. We'll visit the underworld, wander with heroes, hear the love stories, the transformations, the wars. Some tales will feel familiar, like old friends. Others may be new, strange, even dreamlike. And everyone will be softened, told in a way meant to ease you towards sleep. Don't worry if the names seem too many or the stories blur together. They're meant to. Myths were never about exact memory. They're about patterns, about feelings, about the rhythm of human wonder. So let them wash over you. If you drift away into dreams while the gods are still speaking, that's perfectly fine. They'll wait for you, and the story will still be here. Let's imagine, just for a moment, sitting under a starlit Greek sky thousands of years ago. Maybe we're near a campfire or beside a quiet sea. The storyteller clears their throat. The flames crackle. The night air smells of olives and smoke. And they begin. In the beginning, before gods and men, before the earth itself was steady beneath our feet, there was only chaos. And from that moment, the world begins to take shape. But before we rush forward, take one more slow breath. Feel the weight of your body sink into where you rest. Know that all you need to do is listen, or even less than listen. Let the words drift. Let the story hold you. Because tonight, and for many nights to come, we'll follow the entire tale of Greek mythology, from formless nothingness to legends that still echo in our language today. And the world grows quiet again. Before the gods, chaos, Gaia, and the primordials. In the hush before memory, before even the first dawn, there was chaos. Not chaos as in noise or confusion, but chaos as the Greeks imagined it, a yawning gap, a vast openness, a void so wide it had no edge. It wasn't good or bad, dark or light. It simply is, like drifting in endless night with no beginning, no end, and no sound but the pulse of your own breath. Out of this emptiness the first beings came into being, not born, but appearing like sparks in a dark sea. The Greeks called them primordials, the first powers of existence. Each one was less a person and more a force, yet the storytellers gave them shapes and voices so that we could imagine them. The first was Gaia, the earth. She was steady, fertile, broad-backed. She stretched herself out beneath all things, becoming the solid ground. You can picture her as soil and stone, mountains and plains, a mother with wide arms. Gaia was the dependable one. Without her, nothing could stand. Alongside Gaia appeared Tartarus, the deep abyss. If Gaia was the safe floor, Tartarus was the bottomless pit. He was darkness and distance, the place far below where light could not reach. In myths, Tartarus later became the deepest prison, a dungeon for gods themselves. But here at the start, he was simply the echoing space beneath all things, a reminder that every foundation has a depth beneath it. Then came Eros, desire. Not the playful winged Cupid of later art, but something older, more profound. Eros was the pull that brings together what is separate. The Greeks knew that nothing can grow without longing, without attraction, without the urge to unite. Desire was not always gentle, but it was necessary. In the stillness of chaos, Eros shimmered, drawing Gaia and others to create new life. From the void also came Nyx, the night. She was shadow and mystery, veiled in darkness, with a beauty both soothing and frightening. In the poet's songs, Nyx gave birth to many strange children, sleep, death, dreams, even blame and misery. But here, as the world is young, she is simply the velvet sky before the stars exist, a deep blanket over the newborn earth. And from Nyx's shadow stepped her brother Erebus, darkness itself, filling the gaps between things. Together, night and darkness wrapped around the young cosmos like two soft cloaks. The storytellers lingered on these first beings because they weren't just characters, they were explanations. They were a way to say, why does the earth feel safe? Because it is Gaia. Why does the night feel so heavy? Because Nyx walks above us. Why do we long for one another, for warmth and closeness? Because Eros still whispers in the heart. From Gaia, more life soon appeared. She bore Uranus, the sky, vast and glittering. Uranus was her equal and her partner, arching above her in a dome of shining blue by day and sprinkled with stars by night. Earth and sky embraced, and their union filled the empty space with possibility. Together, Gaia and Uranus gave rise to the first great family, the Titans. 12 vast beings, each embodying parts of the natural world. Some were radiant, like Hyperion, Titan of heavenly light, and his sister, Theia, goddess of shining sight. Their children would one day be the sun, the moon, and the dawn. Others were more mysterious, Oceanus, the endless river that encircled the earth, Mnemosyne, memory herself, and Cronus, the youngest but most cunning, with eyes always fixed on power. But not all of Gaia's children were serene. From her union with Uranus also came beings of storm and terror, the one-eyed Cyclopes and the hundred-handed Hecatonchires. Enormous, wild, and powerful, they frightened Uranus. He forced them down into the depths of Gaia herself, locking them away in her belly. Imagine the earth rumbling, mountains groaning from within. That was the pain of Gaia, her own children trapped inside her. This was the first shadow of conflict in the cosmos. Earth and sky had created, but they had also learned to fear what they made. Gaia's sorrow grew. Though she was patient, she felt the weight of her imprisoned children pressing against her soil. So she shaped a plan. From her own body she crafted a sickle of sharp stone. Gathering her Titan children, she asked, "Who among you will help me? Who will rise against Uranus and set your brothers free?" Most of the Titans hesitated. Their father was vast, and the thought of striking him filled them with dread. But Cronus, youngest and ambitious, stepped forward. "I will," he said. His voice was quiet, but certain. And so the stage was set for the first cosmic rebellion, one that would shape everything to come. Before that moment, though, the poets pause, and so will we. It's worth imagining the atmosphere of this tale. Picture the still world, an earth still young and green, a sky glittering with stars, an abyss yawning below. Time itself was only just beginning, marked not by clocks or calendars, but by the beating of hearts, by the choices of these first gods. The Greeks, sitting under their own night skies, would listen and feel a strange comfort. The world around them, the soil, the sea, the longing in their own chest, all of it had been imagined into story. And even the struggles, even the shadows had a place in the grand design. Take a breath here, in and out. Let the thought sink in that even before names, before nations, there was chaos. And from chaos came the earth beneath your bed, the sky above your roof, the night outside your window, and the quiet pull of desire that moves us all. And the world grows quiet again. But the story does not stop. The sickle waits in Cronus's hand, and the stars above grow tense. For the first act of defiance, the first break between parent and child, is about to begin. Soon the Titans will rise. The Titans rise, Cronos and Rhea. So there Cronus stood, his mind as sharp as the sickle in his hand, ready to strike. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him like the first tremor before an earthquake. This wasn't just about freeing his siblings. This was the beginning of a new order. The old had to be swept away, and in that moment, the primal forces of the world, the earth, the sky, shifted like a great sigh before a storm. Cronus and his Titan brothers and sisters waited for the right moment. And when Uranus descended to lie with Gaia once more, when the heavens embraced the earth in a quiet, tender moment, Cronus made his move. He struck with his sickle, cutting through the fabric of the sky itself, the first wound ever dealt to the gods. Uranus, father of all, was cast down, thrown far beyond the reaches of the earth and sky, into the depths of Tartarus, where he would remain, powerless and bound. Now the Titans were free. The world, it seemed, had begun to move in a new direction. Cronus had overthrown his father, and with this act of violence, the universe began to shift, like the first crack in an ancient statue. But power, like water, always seeks its own balance. In the place of Uranus, Cronus became king, seated upon a throne of solid stone. But there was something in the air now, something heavy, like the stillness before a storm. The first echoes of the coming conflict reverberated, but for the moment, the world was silent. Cronus ruled, and the sky and earth, at least for a time, were at peace. And yet, even as Cronus sat upon his throne, he feared the same fate that had befallen his father. For there was a prophecy that had whispered through the winds of Gaia. It said that Cronus, like his father before him, would be overthrown by his own children. A shiver ran through his bones, and the warmth of victory turned cold. The fear of losing his power began to gnaw at him. Cronus, desperate to avoid the same fate, made a terrible decision. He took his sister Rhea, his queen, the mother of the future, and he began to devour their children as soon as they were born. One by one he swallowed them whole, stealing their futures before they could even take a breath. The first to be swallowed was Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, then Demeter, the goddess of grain, Hera, the goddess of marriage, Hades, god of the underworld, and finally Poseidon, god of the sea. Each one disappeared into Cronus's dark belly, and for a time the world felt as though it had lost its light. Rhea, heartbroken by the loss of her children, wept in silence. The weight of her sorrow grew with each passing day, but there was no escape. The throne of Cronus stood like a mountain, heavy and unyielding, and the goddess was caught in its shadow. But then, when Rhea was pregnant once more, she decided that she would not allow this cycle to continue. This time, her child would not be swallowed. She sought the counsel of Gaia, who had always been the earth's nurturing spirit, and the two of them devised a plan. When the time came for Rhea to give birth, she secretly travelled to the island of Crete, far from Cronus's watchful eye. There, in a hidden cave, she gave birth to a son. This child was destined for greatness, for his name was Zeus. Zeus was hidden away on Crete, raised in secret by nymphs and the mighty goat Amalthea, who fed him on the milk of the earth itself. Rhea, meanwhile, swaddled a stone, wrapped it in blankets, and presented it to Cronus, as if it were the newborn child. Cronus, not suspecting a thing, devoured the stone without hesitation, thinking that he had successfully swallowed his newest child. And so Zeus grew strong in the shadows, nourished by the earth, until the day came when he was ready to confront his father. He was no longer a helpless child, but a god who had inherited the will of the earth and the sky. And more importantly, Zeus knew his destiny, to overthrow his father, Cronus, and free his siblings. But the time for that battle had not yet come. Zeus had to first prepare to gather strength. With the guidance of Gaia and the wise counsel of his mother Rhea, Zeus devised a plan to challenge Cronus. He sought the help of Metis, the goddess of wisdom, who gave him a potion that would make Cronus vomit up his children. This potion, hidden in the guise of nectar, was Zeus's secret weapon. When the time was right, Zeus presented himself before Cronus. He was no longer the child, but a god full of fire and potential. "Father," Zeus said, his voice calm but filled with authority, "I bring you nectar to soothe your thirst." Cronus, not suspecting a thing, drank greedily, and with that the potion worked its magic. One by one, Cronus's children, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, were spat out from his belly, alive and whole, each one ready to take their place in the world. The Olympians, as they were called, had returned, and the world itself seemed to breathe easier. But Cronus was not finished yet. He would not go down without a fight. What followed would be the beginning of a war, a great battle between the old gods, the Titans, and the new generation of gods who would rise up from the earth and sky. This war, called the Titanomachy, would echo across time and shape the future of all things. The stage was set. The child who had once been hidden in the shadows was now ready to take his place as the ruler of all, and with his siblings at his side, Zeus would lead the charge to overthrow the Titans and reshape the world forever. But that, dear friend, is a tale for another time. And the world grows quiet again. The child hidden, birth of Zeus and the Titanomachy. The battle was inevitable. The stage had been set for years, and the moment of reckoning had come. Zeus, now grown and strong, was ready. He was no longer a child hidden in the shadows of Crete, but a force that could no longer be ignored, an embodiment of everything that had been building since the first breath of chaos. When Zeus's siblings emerged from Cronus's belly, the earth itself seemed to breathe in relief. The mighty gods, once swallowed and forgotten, now stood before him. Poseidon, god of the seas, his trident gleaming with power. Hades, lord of the underworld, a solemn figure draped in darkness. Demeter, the goddess of grain and the harvest, her presence like a spring breeze. Hera, the queen of marriage, her eyes like twin stars. Each of them was ready to take their place in the world. Together they were a family forged in both agony and hope, a family bound to reshape the cosmos itself. But even with his siblings by his side, Zeus knew the task ahead was daunting. Cronus had once been the ruler of all, and his power had shaped the very foundations of the earth. The Titans were no mere giants. They were ancient, primal forces, the very embodiment of the cosmos before the gods had been born. To face them would require more than just power. It would require strategy, alliances, and wisdom. So, before the war began, Zeus sought counsel from the wise Prometheus, one of the few Titans who had sided with the new gods. Prometheus, whose name means forethought, was known for his cleverness and foresight. He had seen what was coming and, unlike most of the Titans, had chosen to stand with Zeus. Prometheus advised Zeus to seek the help of the ancient Cyclopes, the one-eyed giants who had once been imprisoned by Uranus. The Cyclopes were known for their skill in forging weapons of unimaginable power. Zeus, ever the strategist, knew this was the key. He needed weapons that would match the Titans' strength and give the gods an edge in the coming war. The Cyclopes, upon being freed from their imprisonment in Tartarus, forged 3 mighty weapons for the new gods. For Zeus they crafted the thunderbolt, a weapon of pure, crackling energy, a bolt of lightning so powerful that it could strike down even the most formidable foes. For Poseidon, they created the trident, a 3-pronged spear that could control the seas and shake the earth. And for Hades, they forged the helm of darkness, a helmet that would render him invisible, allowing him to move through the world unnoticed. Armed with these powerful tools, the gods were ready to wage war. But the battle would not be easy. The Titans were mighty, and they had their own weapons, swords, shields, and all manner of elemental forces. The gods and the Titans were about to clash in the Titanomachy, the war that would decide the fate of the world. The first strike was made by the gods. Zeus hurled his thunderbolt with such force that it lit up the sky and shook the very foundations of the earth. The Titans recoiled, stunned by the sheer power of the attack. But Cronus, ever the resilient ruler, rallied his forces. He commanded the Titans to counterattack, and soon the earth itself seemed to tremble with the fury of their war cries. Mountains crumbled, the seas boiled, the sky darkened. For 10 long years the battle raged. The gods fought valiantly, but the Titans were no less determined. The skies above were filled with the roar of thunder and the clash of weapons as gods and Titans alike struggled for supremacy. Yet as time passed, the gods began to gain the upper hand. Their weapons, crafted by the mighty Cyclopes, were unlike anything the Titans had ever faced. With Zeus's thunderbolt, Poseidon's trident, and Hades' helm, the gods slowly began to turn the tide of the war. But the key to victory lay in the heart of the battle. Zeus, knowing that the war could not be won without defeating Cronus, focused all his energy on confronting the Titan king. Cronus, once the mighty ruler, was now weakened by years of conflict. His pride had driven him to swallow his own children, and that act of cruelty had sown the seeds of his downfall. At last, Zeus confronted his father. The 2 gods stood across from each other, father and son, their eyes locked in a moment of intense, charged silence. Cronus, though formidable, now saw the full measure of his fate. He had tried to hold on to his power with his hands full of fear, but he had been betrayed by that very fear. Zeus, with his thunderbolt, was no longer the helpless child he had once been. He was the storm itself, a force of nature, and he would not be denied. With a roar that split the sky, Zeus struck down on Cronus with a thunderbolt that carried the weight of the heavens. Cronus fell to his knees, his immense form shaking with the shock of the blow. His reign had come to an end. The gods' victory was not just over their father, it was a triumph over the very forces that had once held the world in place. The old order, the age of the Titans, was gone, and a new age had begun. But even in victory, Zeus understood the importance of balance. The gods would rule, yes, but they would rule with wisdom and compassion, for the war had shown them how fragile power could be, how quickly it could slip away. With the fall of Cronus, the earth began to heal. The Titans were either imprisoned in Tartarus or made to take new roles in the world. The gods returned to Mount Olympus, where Zeus would take his rightful place as king of the gods. But even as he sat upon the throne, the memory of the Titanomachy lingered in his heart, a reminder of the costs of power, of the sacrifices made, and of the delicate balance between creation and destruction. And so the world was reborn. Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, and all the Olympians took their places, each god with their domain, each with their responsibilities. The earth was theirs to shape, and the sky above, once again, became a stage for the gods' dramas to unfold. But even as the world settled into its new rhythm, a question remained. Would the gods be able to maintain the balance? Would they be able to hold the heavens together without falling into the same pitfalls as their predecessors? Only time would tell. And the world grows quiet again. The Olympian family. Who's who? The Titanomachy was over, the Titans defeated, and a new age had begun. The Olympian gods, the children of Cronus and Rhea, now stood at the helm of the world. The great mountain of Olympus, which once belonged to the Titans, had become their home, a place where the gods could gather in council and shape the world with their will. But before we travel further into their stories, it's important to understand who these Olympians were, what made them gods, and how each of them shaped the world. Each had their own domain, their own passions, and their own complexities. Together they formed a balance, a family of gods, each representing a different aspect of the universe, from love and war to wisdom and harvest. So, let's meet the Olympians, one by one. Zeus, the king of the gods. At the heart of the Olympian family sat Zeus, the mighty king, god of the sky, thunder and lightning. His thunderbolt crackled with the power of the heavens, and his gaze could split mountains. Zeus was a god of justice, but also of contradictions. While he ruled over the heavens, he was often seen as unpredictable, driven by desire and fury, as much a force of chaos as he was of order. His rule was absolute, and yet the weight of that power weighed heavily on him. He was a god of law, but also of freedom, sometimes bending the rules for his own whims. Zeus was also the father of many gods and heroes. His numerous affairs, both with goddesses and mortals, produced children who would go on to become legendary figures in their own right, such as Athena, Apollo, Artemis, and Heracles. Zeus's influence stretched far beyond Olympus, and his presence was felt in every part of the world, from the highest mountains to the deepest seas. Hera, the queen of the gods. Hera, Zeus's sister and wife, was the goddess of marriage and family. As queen of the gods, she embodied the strength of motherhood, the sanctity of marriage, and the complex emotions that come with both. She was regal and powerful, often seen as a protector of women, though her relationship with Zeus was fraught with jealousy and betrayal. Her jealousy, however, was not without cause. Zeus's many affairs, which resulted in children born outside of their marriage, fueled her wrath. While Hera was a goddess of beauty and grace, she could also be vengeful, punishing those who crossed her path or those who Zeus took as lovers. Her love for her children, particularly her son Ares, was fierce, and her connection to the family dynamic gave her an unmatched power within the pantheon. Poseidon, the god of the sea. Poseidon, Zeus's brother, ruled over the seas, rivers, and oceans. With his mighty trident, he could stir the waters into storms or calm them with a single wave. Poseidon was both a creator and destroyer, his moods as changeable as the tides he controlled. He had the power to cause earthquakes, creating havoc and chaos beneath the Earth's surface, yet he could also nurture life in the ocean's depths. Poseidon was not only a god of the seas, but also one of fertility and abundance. He had many consorts and children, both divine and mortal, but his relationship with the other gods was often marked by rivalry and competition. His temper was known to be as unpredictable as the waves he commanded, and while he was a powerful protector, he could also be wrathful when slighted. Demeter, the goddess of the harvest. Demeter, the sister of Zeus, was the goddess of the harvest, the earth's fertility, and the changing seasons. She controlled the growth of crops and the abundance of the land, ensuring that food was plentiful and the earth was fertile. Demeter was a nurturing goddess, embodying the cycle of life and death, as well as the eternal rhythms of nature. Her most famous myth is the story of her daughter Persephone, whom she lost to Hades in the underworld. Demeter's grief over Persephone's abduction caused the earth to wither and the seasons to freeze, a sorrow that would only be relieved when Persephone returned to her mother. This myth is the foundation of the changing seasons, the dead of winter representing Persephone's time in the underworld, and the return of spring heralding her reunion with Demeter. Athena, the goddess of wisdom. Athena, the daughter of Zeus and the Titaness Metis, was born fully grown from her father's forehead after he swallowed her mother. She was the goddess of wisdom, courage, and strategic warfare, a protector of cities and civilization. Athena was revered for her intelligence and skill in battle, as well as her fairness and justice. Unlike Ares, the god of war, Athena represented the more thoughtful, tactical side of warfare, victory through reason, not rage. Athena was also a virgin goddess, embodying the ideal of purity and self-sufficiency. She was known for her wisdom in guiding heroes like Perseus and Odysseus, and her influence extended to the arts, philosophy, and law. Her presence was felt strongly in Athens, the city that was named in her honor, where her temple, the Parthenon, stood as a symbol of her strength and wisdom. Apollo, the god of the sun, music, and prophecy. Apollo, the son of Zeus and the Titaness Leto, was one of the most revered gods in the Greek pantheon. He was the god of the sun, music, poetry, and prophecy, known for his beauty and youthful strength. Apollo's golden chariot pulled the sun across the sky each day, and his music, played on his lyre, could calm even the most troubled souls. He was also the god of healing, but could also bring illness with his arrows, a reminder that the power of the gods was never fully benevolent. Apollo's connection to prophecy was legendary. He was the keeper of the Oracle of Delphi, where people would travel from far and wide to seek his divine guidance. Artemis, the goddess of the moon and the hunt. Artemis, Apollo's twin sister, was the goddess of the moon, the hunt, and wild animals. She was a virgin goddess, fiercely independent and devoted to the protection of nature. Artemis roamed the forests with her bow and arrows, protecting women and children, as well as the animals she held dear. Artemis was also a goddess of childbirth, ensuring that women had safe and smooth deliveries. She was seen as a protector of the innocent, but her wrath could be swift and unforgiving when those who broke her sacred laws of nature. Ares, the god of war. Ares, the son of Zeus and Hera, was the god of war, but unlike Athena, who represented strategy, Ares was associated with the bloodlust and chaos of battle. He reveled in the violence and destruction of war, and his presence on the battlefield was both feared and despised. Despite his importance in the pantheon, Ares was not as widely adored as some of the other Olympians. His relationship with his parents was strained. Hera, his mother, had no love for him, and Zeus, his father, often found him to be a troublesome and aggressive god. Yet, Ares was an essential part of the Olympian family, representing the harsh and inevitable side of human nature. The world map of myth seas, skies, and the underworld. The Olympian gods reigned supreme, but the world they controlled stretched far beyond the golden halls of Mount Olympus. Their influence was not confined to the towering peaks of their home. It reached out across the seas, through the sky, and deep beneath the earth. Each god ruled a domain that was as vast as it was powerful, a place where the fabric of reality itself seemed to bend to their will. To understand the true scope of Greek mythology, we must first understand these realms: the seas, the skies, and the underworld. The seas, Poseidon's domain. Beneath the clouds, across the vast expanse of the ocean, lies the domain of Poseidon, the god of the seas. With his trident in hand, Poseidon governed not just the waters of the earth, but also the unknown depths beneath, where creatures of legend swam and the very earth itself trembled. Poseidon's realm was vast and unpredictable. The oceans could be as calm and nurturing as a mother's embrace, or as violent and unyielding as a tempest, ready to devour ships and sailors alike. Sailors, travelers, and traders prayed to Poseidon for safe passage, offering sacrifices to him in hopes of avoiding the stormy wrath that could easily turn a calm voyage into a shipwreck. It was within Poseidon's realm that many famous myths took place. Odysseus' journey home after the Trojan War, for instance, was marked by Poseidon's wrath. The god was enraged at Odysseus for blinding his son, the Cyclops Polyphemus, and thus punished him with endless storms. Poseidon's realm was not just dangerous, but alive with mystery, filled with islands, underwater cities, and beings like the Nereids, sea nymphs, and Charybdis, the great sea monster that could swallow entire ships in a single gulp. Poseidon also created many of the world's great rivers. The Nile, the Styx, and others were born from his trident strike, giving him not only dominion over the sea, but over all bodies of water. Rivers were seen as the lifeblood of the earth, and Poseidon's touch ran through every drop. The skies. Zeus's domain. Above the earth, in the vast expanse of the heavens, ruled Zeus, the god of the sky. With his thunderbolt, he commanded the clouds, the winds, and the very weather itself. The sky was not just a physical space, but a symbolic one, representing the authority of Zeus, who was seen as the ultimate judge of both gods and mortals. His rule was seen in the rising of the sun, the passing of storms, and the movement of the winds. But the skies were also the realm of Aeolus, the god of the winds who lived in a floating palace. Though Aeolus was subordinate to Zeus, his control over the winds made him a key figure in many myths. Jason and the Argonauts, for example, relied on Aeolus to calm the winds so that they could sail to their destiny. The winds were powerful, often bringing both fortune and disaster, and the gods used them to further their own purposes, whether to send heroes on epic journeys or to punish mortals. The skies were also home to the eagle, the sacred animal of Zeus, whose sharp eyes symbolized his all-seeing nature. The clouds themselves were often personified in myths, mysterious forces of nature, sometimes gentle, sometimes ominous, drifting through the heavens at Zeus's will. The underworld, Hades' realm. Far below the earth, in the darkness beyond the reach of sunlight, lay the realm of Hades, the god of the underworld. This was a place of mystery and fear where souls journeyed after death. It was not a realm of punishment per se, that was reserved for Tartarus, but a place of quiet, shadowed existence. The dead wandered here, guided by the spirits of Charon, the ferryman, who would carry them across the river Styx to the realm of their final rest. The underworld was a place where the cycle of life and death was complete. The dead, after crossing the Styx, were judged by Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, three judges who decided whether a soul would reside in the Elysian fields a peaceful place of rest for the virtuous, or be cast into Tartarus, the pit of punishment and torment. While Hades' realm was often seen as dark and grim, it was also necessary for the balance of life. Without death, there could be no life. Hades was the guardian of that balance, ensuring that the dead stayed in their place and that the world above was free to thrive. He was often misunderstood, seen as a cruel god, but in truth, he was simply a keeper of the natural order. In Hades' realm, we also find the famous Persephone myth. She had been abducted by Hades and brought to the underworld, where she became his queen. Her mother, Demeter, mourned her loss so deeply that the earth itself began to wither. The gods intervened, and it was decreed that Persephone would spend part of the year with Hades in the underworld and part with her mother on earth. This myth explained the changing of the seasons. Persephone Hesse returned to the earth marked the arrival of spring and summer, while her descent to the underworld marked the onset of fall and winter. Other realms and regions. Beyond the seas, skies, and underworld, the Greek world was filled with other realms, each touched by the gods' influence. The mountains were sacred to many gods, like Apollo, who lived on Mount Parnassus, and Artemis, whose hunting grounds were in the hills and forests. Delphi, the site of Apollo's famous oracle, was said to be the center of the world, where the god would speak through his priestesses. The Cave of the Winds was another notable place, where Boreas and the other wind gods lived, shaping the weather with their breath. There were also the Fates, 3 sisters who spun, measured, and cut the thread of life for every mortal and god alike. They lived in a realm untouched by time, controlling the very destiny of all beings. The balance of the cosmos. The world of Greek mythology was a world of balance. While Zeus ruled the skies and Poseidon commanded the seas, it was Hades who kept the balance of life and death. The gods of Olympus shaped the world as they wished, but their power was not unlimited. Each god had their realm, and within that realm they could do as they pleased. But their influence stopped at the boundaries of their domains. The gods were not omnipotent. They had their limits, their rules, and their struggles with one another. The mythological world was not just a place of peace and order, but a place of constant shifting, rivalry, and ambition. Each god, each realm, was part of a larger design, a tapestry woven over centuries of myth and legend. The gods themselves were reflections of the human experience, powerful, flawed, capable of great love and cruelty, and forever struggling to find their place in the cosmos. And the world grows quiet again. Heroes, monsters, and mortals. While the gods ruled from the heights of Olympus, it was the mortals, the humans, who lived in the world below. They were born from the earth and the stars, destined to live, struggle, and die. But within their ranks there were those who defied fate. They became heroes, figures of myth and legend, whose deeds transcended mortality and earned them a place in the stories that would live for centuries. But for every hero, there were also monsters, creatures born of chaos, fear, and the unknown. They roamed the earth and the seas, challenging the gods and mortals alike. Some were born from the wrath of the gods, others from the earth itself, but all were terrifying in their own way. Together, heroes and monsters shaped the world of Greek mythology. The heroes, mortal men and women with divine favor. The Greek heroes were often demigods, the offspring of a god and a mortal. They were not born with divine power, yet they were blessed with extraordinary abilities, and their feats would shape the myths that followed. Heracles, Hercules. Perhaps the most famous of all the Greek heroes, Heracles was the son of Zeus and the mortal Alcmene. From birth, He was marked for greatness, but also for hardship. Heracles' strength was unmatched, but it was his 12 labors that truly cemented his place in myth. The labors were a punishment, a way for Heracles to atone for the madness that Hera had sent him into, causing him to kill his own children. His feats, including slaying the Nemean lion, capturing the Ceryneian hind, and bringing back the Hesperides' golden apples, were not just acts of heroism but tests of endurance, wit, and bravery. Despite his incredible strength, Heracles was a deeply human figure, constantly struggling with his own mortality, flaws, and suffering. His life was one of trial, and ultimately, after completing his labors, he was granted immortality by the gods. His story became a symbol of perseverance and redemption. Perseus. Another legendary hero, Perseus was the son of Zeus and Danae. His greatest feat was the slaying of Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze could turn people to stone. With the help of the gods, Hermes provided him with winged sandals, Athena gave him a shield, and Hephaestus crafted a sword. Perseus set out on his dangerous mission. But his journey didn't end with Medusa. Perseus also rescued Andromeda, a princess who was chained to a rock as a sacrifice to a sea monster, and eventually became the king of Argos. Perseus's story was a tale of bravery, cleverness, and divine intervention, marking him as one of the most beloved heroes of Greek myth. Theseus was a prince of Athens, famous for slaying the Minotaur, a monstrous creature that lived in the labyrinth on the island of Crete. The Minotaur was the offspring of Pasiphae, the queen of Crete, and a bull sent by Poseidon. Theseus's journey to defeat the Minotaur is one of the most famous stories in Greek mythology. He used a thread given to him by Ariadne, the daughter of King Minos, to navigate the labyrinth and face the beast. Theseus's story represents the triumph of intellect and courage over pure strength and monstrosity. But his life wasn't without flaws. His tragic mistake of forgetting to change the sails of his ship caused his father, Aegeus, to take his own life, thinking his son had died. This moment of human error added depth to Theseus's heroism. Atalanta, unlike many other heroes, was a female warrior, renowned for her speed and hunting prowess. She was abandoned by her father at birth, but raised by a she-bear and became one of the greatest hunters of her time. She participated in the Caledonian boar hunt, where she was the first to strike the beast. Atalanta's story is often one of defiance, as she refused to marry unless a suitor could beat her in a race, a challenge that many failed. Her story is a testament to strength, independence, and the power of will. The monsters, the beasts, and bane of mortals. Where there are heroes, there are also monsters. Creatures born from the darkest parts of the earth, or cursed by the gods. Monsters were often obstacles that heroes had to overcome, but they were also symbols of the primal forces of nature, fear, and chaos. The Minotaur. The Minotaur, half man and half bull, was one of the most terrifying creatures in Greek mythology. Born from the union of Pasiphae and a sacred bull, the Minotaur was locked away in the labyrinth of Crete by King Minos, a maze so complex that no one could escape once they entered. The creature's presence in the labyrinth represented the dark, untamable aspects of the natural world, something that had to be conquered to restore order. Theseus's victory over the Minotaur marked his transition from a prince to a hero, a symbol of civilization overcoming wild, primal forces. Medusa and the Gorgons. Medusa was once a beautiful maiden, but after she was cursed by Athena, she was transformed into a monster with snakes for hair and a gaze that turned anyone who looked into her eyes to stone. The Gorgons, her sisters, shared the same monstrous traits, but it was Medusa who became the most famous of them all. Perseus' slaying of Medusa was not just a triumph of heroism, but also a symbolic act of overcoming fear and chaos. After her death, Medusa's head was used as a weapon, turning enemies to stone, and it became a symbol of power. Cerberus, the three-headed dog that guarded the gates of the underworld, Cerberus was a creature that no mortal could pass unless granted permission. He was the ultimate guardian, ensuring that no soul could escape the underworld. The beast was both a protector and a symbol of the inescapable finality of death. While the gods could come and go as they pleased, mortals were not so fortunate. Cerberus's myth reminded humanity of the inevitability of their own mortality. The Hydra. The Hydra was a multi-headed, serpent-like creature that lived in the swamps of Lerna. Every time one of its heads was cut off, two more would grow in its place, making it a nearly impossible beast to defeat. Heracles faced the Hydra as one of his 12 labors, and he used fire to cauterize the stumps of the severed heads, preventing them from regenerating. The Hydra-S myth is one of the many examples of how Greek heroes faced challenges that were not just physical, but required strategy, intelligence, and patience. Mortals, the fragility of life. While heroes were marked by their extraordinary deeds, the mortal realm itself was filled with ordinary humans, individuals who were not born of gods or monsters, but who lived lives marked by struggle, love, and fate. In Greek mythology, even the most ordinary humans were subject to the whims of the gods. Mortals were often used as pawns in the gods' games, punished for their hubris or rewarded for their virtue. But in the end, their stories were always fleeting, reminding the gods and heroes alike of the fragile nature of existence. One of the most famous mortal stories is that of Achilles, whose strength and near invincibility made him a legendary hero of the Trojan War. Yet despite his near-divine nature, Achilles' story was one of tragic mortality, ending with his death by an arrow to his heel, the one vulnerable spot on his body. And the world grows quiet again. The Trojan War and the Odyssey. The Greek myths are filled with tales of gods, monsters, and heroes, but none resonate as deeply as the story of the Trojan War and the Odyssey. The Trojan War, sparked by love and jealousy, was a battle that would shape the course of the Greek world. Its consequences would echo through history, and its heroes would become eternal symbols of strength, honor, and tragedy. But the war didn't end on the battlefield. It gave rise to one of the greatest journeys ever told, as Odysseus embarked on an epic quest to return home. Let's dive into the heart of these stories and explore the twists and turns of war, betrayal, and the longing for home. The cause of the war: Paris, Helen, and the judgment of Paris. The story of the Trojan War begins not with battle, but with a beauty contest, one that would determine the fate of a city, an empire, and countless lives. It all started when Eris, the goddess of discord, wasn't invited to a wedding feast held by Peleus and Thetis, the parents of Achilles. Outraged, she tossed a golden apple into the crowd, inscribed with the words, "For the fairest." 3 goddesses immediately claimed the apple: Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. To settle the dispute, the god Zeus chose the mortal prince Paris of Troy to judge which goddess was the fairest. Each goddess offered Paris a tempting bribe. Hera promised him power, Athena promised him wisdom, and Aphrodite promised him the love of the most beautiful mortal woman in the world, Helen, the Queen of Sparta. Paris, dazzled by Aphrodite's promise, chose her as the winner. In return, she helped Paris abduct Helen from her husband Menelaus, king of Sparta. This act of theft set off a chain reaction that led to the Trojan War. Menelaus, enraged by the loss of his wife, called upon all the Greek kings and warriors who had sworn an oath to defend Helen's marriage. Led by Agamemnon, Menelaus's brother, the Greeks sailed to Troy to reclaim Helen and exact revenge. The Trojan War, 10 years of struggle and strife. The war that followed would last 10 long years. Troy, ruled by King Priam, was a wealthy and powerful city, protected by high walls that seemed invincible. The Greek forces laid siege to the city, but despite their strength and numbers, they struggled to breach the walls. The Trojan War was not just a clash of armies, it was a battle of wits, honor, and willpower, with gods intervening at every turn. Achilles, the greatest of the Greek heroes, was the key figure in the war. His strength was unparalleled, and his anger was legendary. He was nearly invincible thanks to his mother Thetis, who dipped him into the river Styx, making him immortal except for his heel, his Achilles heel, which would later become his undoing. For most of the war, Achilles was the Greeks' most powerful warrior, but his pride was as great as his power. When Agamemnon took a captive woman named Perseus from Achilles as a prize, Achilles withdrew from the battle in anger, refusing to fight. With Achilles absent, the tide of the war shifted. The Trojans, led by Hector, Priam's son, gained the upper hand. Hector was a noble warrior, beloved by his people, and he fought with the heart of a lion. In one of the war's most tragic moments, Hector killed Patroclus, Achilles' closest companion, while wearing Achilles' armor. This act spurred Achilles back into the fray, and he swore revenge. Achilles vs. Hector became the defining duel of the war. In a dramatic and fateful battle, Achilles killed Hector and dragged his body around the walls of Troy in a fit of rage, denying Hector the honor of a proper burial. However, in an act of compassion, Achilles eventually allowed Priam, Hector's father, to ransom his son's body and give him a respectful funeral. The Greeks, having lost their greatest warrior for a time, were reinvigorated by Achilles' return, but the war was far from over. The gods, too, had their part to play, with deities like Apollo and Athena taking sides and intervening in battle. The fall of Troy, the trick of the wooden horse. After 10 years of fighting, the Greeks were no closer to victory. The walls of Troy remained impregnable, and both sides had suffered heavy losses. But the Greeks, masters of strategy, devised a plan that would bring about the fall of the great city. The plan was born of the mind of Odysseus, a hero known not just for his strength, but for his cunning. The Greeks built a massive wooden horse, large enough to hold a small group of men inside, and left it at the gates of Troy as a supposed gift to the gods, meant to secure a safe journey home. The Trojans, believing they had won and that the horse was a symbol of peace, brought it into the city as a trophy. That night, while the Trojans celebrated, a group of Greek soldiers hidden inside the horse emerged and opened the gates of Troy to the waiting Greek army, who had secretly returned under the cover of darkness. The Greeks flooded into the city, and after a night of destruction and bloodshed, Troy was razed to the ground. The Trojans, caught by surprise, were slaughtered or enslaved, and the great city fell. Helen was returned to Menelaus, and the Greek forces returned home, but their troubles were far from over. The Odyssey, Odysseus's long journey home. While the Trojan War had ended, the aftermath was not kind to the Greeks. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, had played a central role in the fall of Troy, but his journey home would be one of the most difficult and legendary of all time. The Odyssey is the tale of his 10-year struggle to return to his wife, Penelope, and son Telemachus after the war. Along the way, Odysseus encountered numerous obstacles, each one more fantastical than the last. He and his crew faced the Cyclops Polyphemus, a giant with a single eye. They sailed past the sirens, whose voices could drive men to madness. They navigated the deadly whirlpool Charybdis and the monster Scylla. They ventured into the underworld to consult the prophet Tiresias, and they had to outwit gods, monsters, and men alike. Throughout it all, Odysseus displayed his greatest strength, his mind. It wasn't just his strength or courage that made him a hero, but his intelligence, wit, and ability to think his way out of impossible situations. But Odysseus's journey was also one of deep personal growth. He faced trials that tested his loyalty, his patience, and his sense of home and family. Finally, after years of suffering and wandering, Odysseus returned to Ithaca. But his homecoming was not a simple one. His kingdom had been overrun by suitors vying for Penelope's hand, and Odysseus had to fight once more, not just for survival, but for his place in the world. In a climactic moment, Odysseus and his son, Telemachus, slaughtered the suitors and restored order to his household. The legacy of the Trojan War and the Odyssey. The stories of the Trojan War and the Odyssey became foundational to Greek culture and literature. They were the subjects of epics that shaped the ideas of heroism, sacrifice, fate, and the role of the gods in human life. The Trojan War was not just a battle of armies. It was a battle between the will of the gods and the determination of men, between fate and free will, between love and loss. And Odysseus's journey home was a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, to the longing for home and the cost of wandering too far from it. But the war and the Odyssey are also stories of tragedy. The heroes of the Trojan War were noble, but they were also flawed, and their stories were filled with loss and death. Heroes like Achilles, Hector, and Patroclus died young, and the gods, though powerful, were as capricious as ever. The war's end did not bring peace. It brought chaos and grief, leaving its heroes broken and its city in ruins. And the world grows quiet again. The gods, after the war, a new order. The Trojan War, though fought by mortal men, had profound consequences for the gods themselves. After the great conflict, the gods faced a world that was forever changed. The mortal realm, too, was altered, as many heroes returned home to find their kingdoms in disarray or their loved ones changed by the war. The gods could no longer be content with the old ways. A new order had to be established, a balance between power, pride, and the consequences of their past actions. The once mighty city of Troy lay in ruins, its walls broken, and its people scattered. But as the dust settled, it became clear that the war was not the final battle. It had been a stage in a larger drama that was still unfolding. The gods' roles were evolving, and they were about to face new trials. Zeus and the Olympians, shifting power and divine rivalries. The end of the Trojan War left Zeus in a position of unparalleled power, but also one of great uncertainty. Though he remained the king of the gods, his reign had never been without challenge. Zeus had defeated the Titans and brought order to the cosmos, but the war with Troy revealed the fragility of peace and the gods' ability to manipulate mortals. In the aftermath, Zeus struggled to maintain balance among the gods. His relationship with Hera remained tumultuous, his many affairs causing friction with the queen of the gods. Even though he ruled with supreme authority, Zeus had to manage the delicate relationships between his children, his siblings, and the other gods who felt entitled to power. Zeus had also lost some of the reverence and trust he had once commanded. The gods had begun to question his decisions, and there was a growing sense that his control over the heavens might not last forever. The gods were no longer purely benevolent figures. They were, like their mortal counterparts, driven by ambition, jealousy, and personal desires. The Trojan War had shown that even gods could make mistakes, and they could not remain detached from the human world, without facing consequences. The rise of Athena and the Age of Heroes. In the aftermath of Troy's fall, Athena emerged as one of the most influential deities in Greek mythology. As the goddess of wisdom, war strategy, and craft, Athena's role in the war had been pivotal, particularly in the defeat of Troy. She had guided heroes like Odysseus and Perseus to victory, offering advice and wisdom in times of crisis. Athena's influence grew in the wake of the war, and she became a symbol of strategic thinking, reason, and fairness. Unlike Ares, the god of chaotic war, Athena embodied the idea that war should be fought with justice and purpose. Her wisdom would guide the next generation of heroes, teaching them that victory could be won through intelligence and planning, not just brute strength. However, even Athena faced challenges. The gods were still divided, and there were those who resented her wisdom and influence. Her association with Zeus, the king of the gods, placed her in a difficult position, as other gods, particularly those with more personal ambitions, sought to challenge her authority. Athena, despite her wisdom, found herself caught in the complex web of divine politics that would define the years following the war. Poseidon's legacy, the sea and its uncertainty. While Athena's star rose in the wake of the Trojan War, Poseidon, the god of the sea, struggled with his own legacy. Though he had been one of the key gods in the Greek victory over Troy, his role as the god of the oceans left him in a strange position. The seas, which had once been his domain, became a place of turmoil in the years after the war. Pirates and sailors took advantage of the chaos in the world, and Poseidon's power over the sea seemed more chaotic than ever. The hero Perseus had already tamed the sea's monsters like the Cetus, and Poseidon's control over the waters was increasingly challenged by mortals and other gods. His relationship with Zeus remained strained, as Poseidon, like his fellow gods, sought more control and influence in the new world. As the seas became a battleground for mortal interests, Poseidon's role as a ruler of the waters was no longer as unquestioned as before. The seas, once a symbol of Poseidon's power, became a place where mortals could challenge the gods, where human ambition threatened the natural order. The god of the sea found himself increasingly sidelined in the wake of the war, and his influence began to wane. The other gods, including Athena and Apollo, began to take on more active roles in the mortal world. The role of Hera and Demeter, mothers in the new world. While the gods of war and wisdom held sway, the roles of Hera and Demeter, the goddesses of marriage and the harvest, were also shifting in the aftermath of the war. As mothers, both Hera and Demeter were seen as protectors of the family and the earth, but their influence over mortal affairs had changed. Hera's bitterness over Zeus's many infidelities continued to cloud her relationships with the other gods. Her jealousy and rage often caused her to intervene in the lives of mortals, and her vendettas were legendary. She had punished many of Zeus's lovers and their children, such as Heracles, whose life was marked by her constant interference. Yet in the post-war era, Hera's position became more complicated. She was no longer the powerful queen of the gods who could dictate the course of the heavens. Instead, her role became more of a guardian of the family unit, and her interventions were more about maintaining order than asserting her dominance. Still, her relationship with Zeus remained fraught with tension, and the divine family struggled to maintain its balance. Demeter, on the other hand, found her influence growing in the wake of the war. As the goddess of the harvest, she was revered by the people, especially in times of war and famine. The destruction of Troy had left many people homeless, and Demeter's role as the nurturer of the earth became more vital than ever. Her relationship with her daughter Persephone also became central to her role, as the changing seasons were now seen as a direct reflection of Persephone's time spent in the underworld. Demeter's influence over the natural world gave her an important role in the new order, as mortals turned to her for sustenance and prosperity in the wake of war. While the gods' domains shifted, Demeter's connection to the earth remained unchanged, and her power was essential to the balance of life after the war. The aftermath for mortals: heroes lost, heroes found. While the gods grappled with their new roles, mortals too had to adjust to the world after Troy. The heroes who had survived the war, Odysseus, Achilles, Ajax, Menelaus, Agamemnon, returned to their kingdoms, but peace did not come easily. The years following the war were marked by betrayals, bloodshed, and tragedy. Agamemnon returned home to find his wife Clytemnestra had murdered him in revenge for the sacrifice of their daughter, Iphigenia, before the war. Odysseus, having endured a decade-long journey home, found his kingdom overrun with suitors vying for his wife, Penelope's hand. He had to fight once again to restore order to his household. Heroes like Ajax and Achilles were no longer among the living, their tragic deaths a testament to the futility of war. The death of Achilles especially left a void, as no mortal warrior could match his strength. As the years went on, the glory of the past seemed increasingly distant, and the war-torn world struggled to find a new sense of balance. The gods, too, recognized that the world of mortals had changed. The aftermath of the Trojan War had left a lingering bitterness and a need for new heroes. As the gods reasserted their power, they also had to deal with the consequences of their past actions. Their interference in mortal lives had left a trail of suffering, and now they had to decide whether to continue their divine meddling or let mortals find their own way. And the world grows quiet again. The age of heroes ends, the legacy of the gods. The Trojan War, Odysseus's voyage home, and the epic tales of heroes fighting against impossible odds have all shaped the world of Greek mythology. But as time passed, the golden age of heroes came to an end, leaving behind a legacy of both glory and destruction. The gods and mortals continued their influence on the world, but the era of great deeds of men like Heracles, Theseus, and Achilles slowly faded into legend. The gods, once so involved in the lives of humans, gradually retreated into the heavens, their power waning as mortal lives and destinies became more autonomous. This is the closing chapter, the end of the age when gods walked among men and heroes defied fate, and the beginning of a new world. A world where myths remained, but the line between reality and myth blurred. It was an age of reflection, a time when both the gods and mortals realized that even immortality and greatness have their limits. The end of the heroic age. The gods had once walked among mortals, their whims and conflicts shaping the fate of entire cities and nations. But as the heroic age drew to a close, the line between divine intervention and mortal will became more distinct. Mortals began to forge their own paths, and the gods found themselves on the fringes of human lives. Their direct influence over the affairs of men waned, though their stories were far from forgotten. Heroes who had once been revered as the paragons of virtue and strength became more distant figures, their tales a reminder of a world that no longer existed. The deaths of the greatest heroes, such as Achilles, who died at Troy, and Heracles, whose tragic fate was sealed by his own mortality, marked the end of an era. Heroes like Perseus, Theseus, and Jason faded into the distant past, their once living legacies now part of a mythic tradition. The gods who had guided these heroes also shifted their focus. No longer were they the active participants in mortal affairs. They had grown content to watch from afar. In the end, the age of heroes turned into an age of reflection. Mortals could no longer look to gods for constant guidance or intervention. and they had to rely on their own wisdom, intellect, and courage to survive. Heroes became the stuff of stories and songs, their feats immortalized in epic poetry. Yet these tales were no longer a call to action. Instead, they became moral lessons, reminders of the fragility of human ambition and the inevitable passage of time. The gods and their evolving roles. For the gods, the heroic age did not mean the end of their influence, but it did mean a transformation in how they interacted with the mortal world. No longer could they shape history with the same ease as before, nor could they claim such dominance over the lives of humans. Their influence became more symbolic, a distant presence that loomed over the world, but no longer directly controlled it. Zeus, as the king of the gods, continued to rule from Olympus, but his role was more ceremonial than ever. The thunderbolts of old, which had once struck down mortals and gods alike, were now rarely used. He no longer needed to intervene in mortal affairs to maintain order. His rule was symbolized by justice and law rather than by the raw power of his might. However, he still demanded reverence and respect, for the gods could never fully relinquish their place at the top of the cosmic hierarchy. Ares, the god of war, also saw a shift in his position. His influence over the battlefield was still feared, but the wars of the new era were less glamorous and more brutal, fought with strategy rather than sheer force. As war became more politically and economically driven, Ares's role became less important in the eyes of mortals. The god of war was still worshipped, but less as a god who commanded respect, and more as a god whose intervention was a last resort. Athena, ever the goddess of wisdom and strategy, found her influence transforming too. Though she had been a key figure in guiding mortal heroes during their quests, the gods now entrusted the future of humanity to wisdom, art, and knowledge. Athena's role became that of a protector of civilization, emphasizing reason, education, and the development of societies, rather than direct involvement in the lives of individual heroes. And then there was Hera, who remained an embodiment of marriage, family, and the complex dynamics of power within relationships. She was less concerned with the squabbles of the gods, and more focused on the preservation of harmony among families and communities. While her jealousy and wrathful nature had once defined her, now her role was more dignified, her importance tied to the human condition rather than divine politics. The rise of new powers, the influence of philosophy and reason. As the gods stepped back, another force began to rise, philosophy. The influence of thinkers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle shifted the focus of Greek society away from divine intervention and toward the power of human reason and logic. Mortals began to look inward, seeking knowledge from within rather than relying on the whims of the gods. Philosophers questioned the nature of existence, the role of the gods, and the purpose of life. This shift had profound implications for the legacy of the gods. While mythological stories continued to be told, they no longer held the same weight in the daily lives of mortals. The gods were still revered in temples, but their direct involvement in mortal affairs was seen as less certain. Humans now believed that they could shape their own destinies, guided by reason and intellect rather than by divine forces. The gods, once so powerful and revered, became figures of myth and allegory. Their roles in the lives of mortals remained in stories, but the gods themselves were no longer active participants in the world. Philosophers and rational thinkers created a new framework of understanding, one where human intellect could overcome divine manipulation and mortal fate. The legacy of the gods, myths as moral lessons. As the age of heroes ended, the gods' influence transitioned into a symbolic role. The stories of their deeds were no longer simply seen as grand histories, they became moral lessons. The gods, with their flawed personalities and their complex relationships, taught mortals about the dangers of pride, the consequences of hubris, and the inevitability of fate. Each god represented a fundamental aspect of the human experience. Zeus was justice, Hera was marriage and power dynamics, Athena was wisdom, Ares was war, and Demeter was the earth and its cycles. Through their myths, mortals learned that the gods might not always be just, and their decisions were often driven by personal motives and emotions, just like humans. The gods, in their imperfections, offered a reflection of the human condition, a reminder that even the divine could fall prey to their own flaws. The stories of the gods and heroes became a way for ancient Greeks to understand the world around them. As the generations passed, the gods' personalities and relationships became lessons in ethics, responsibility, and personal growth. Their myths were not just tales of adventure, they were a means of navigating the complex and often chaotic world in which humans lived. The end of an era, but not of memory. Though the age of heroes and the active influence of the gods ended, the legacy of Greek mythology lived on. The gods remained figures of great importance in art, literature, and philosophy. Heroes like Heracles and Odysseus continued to be celebrated, their stories retold in poems, plays, and writings. The myths did not die, they evolved. The lessons embedded in the stories of gods and mortals resonated through history, influencing future generations and cultures. The gods, though no longer active participants in the world, continued to inspire awe, fear, and reverence in the hearts of mortals. The age of heroes may have ended, but the myths of Greece would forever be part of the fabric of humanity. They would shape the stories of every culture that came after and continue to echo in the imagination of every person who looked to the stars and wondered about the divine. And the world grows quiet again.